Hello, welcome to another edition of the Inverted Podcast. This time we are four of us. Jeroen is not able to make it. He's been held hostage by other um, duties of his life. But nevertheless, we have a guest today, Elliott, and today we're talking about product design, like product design, content design. How does design help to make products more secure, privacy preserving? How do we help people understand what their options are, and how does design fall into that? It's like it's so much more than just making the UI look pretty or putting text on a button. It's really a crucial part of building trust and helping people make decisions to help them know what decisions they make, specifically about privacy, but there's also a lot of security implications with that. Let's start with you, Elliot. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Dario. And yeah, I said, I'm really honored to be on this podcast. It's, you guys are doing incredible work and are super, super smart. So I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm Elliot. I'm a former content designer, and I worked at Meta for over 7 years, and I worked with Dario for a couple of years on Workplace, which was one of Meta's business products. Yeah, I specialize in enterprise business and SaaS software, especially with privacy. And that's kind of the products that I worked on at Meta. I've been in tech for about 11 years. I started as a copywriter and then went into UX writing, started in e-commerce and then kind of moved through to edtech and fintech. And yeah, this is the thing I'm passionate about. So yeah, excited to dive into it.
Great. And when we spoke about having you on the podcast, you mentioned one of your thesis or theories that product designers or product teams should make trust and safety as a part of the product experience. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, this is something I'm very passionate about. It's a bit of a crusade of mine, and um, I guess there is a kind of an there. I suppose for context, the technology we use is changing rapidly. That the society around the technology changes rapidly, but for me, there is a through line. In all my years in tech, is that the approach is kind of the same. Legalese and privacy ease are kind of endemic. We know from countless user research sessions that I've been in, from friends and family, that people skip and don't read and don't engage with the important information that tells them how their data is being used and how we keep them safe. Because it's complex and it's hard to understand, and through nobody's fault we often end up kind of putting together a big block of privacy notices on a web page and link to it with a tiny little URL or a tiny little button or something. And the results of that can be pretty catastrophic when we don't have clarity and when we don't really make things understandable and break them down. And it often gets deprioritized. And I don't think it's that designers and teams don't care about it, but I think that baking privacy into the sign up flow, the admin section, the emails you get when you sign up, those are often quite hard to make a case for because they don't necessarily translate into ROI and they don't necessarily translate into immediate impact. And I think there's also we have a very deep rooted we're used to skipping over the privacy terms or kind of thinking, oh, I'm going to read and kind of agree to these kind of this kind of these kind of guidelines of how I'm going to use a product. And I think there's what I talk about a lot is shifting that paradigm and actually using product design, using UI, using UX to really add some kind of deliberate friction and add some kind of steps in a process so that people really absorb in human language and in a way that is intuitive how their data is being used, what they can and can't do. And especially with enterprise. I mean, this is one of the most paramount things we see again and again is that companies want trust and employees are often, kind of voluntold into using products. And so, yeah, there is a lot of work I've done around breaking down those existing paradigms of the big wall of complex legal text or the big wall of complex text that, someone outside of the design world has written, and bringing that into the experience so that people really absorb and understand. And sorry, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I think that the core of this is, and the core of how I think about privacy is often the expectation versus the reality. So when a user is going into a product or engaging with a product, often privacy issues, data use issues, integrity issues come from perhaps a lack of understanding or lack of education around what they're going to see. There might be a surprise. We want to mitigate and kind of reduce those surprises and reduce those kind of expectation gaps in between how I think the product is going to work and what actually happens by using UI and using the different kind of visual elements and kind of experiential elements that we use throughout the rest of the product. I hope that makes it clear. It's quite hard sometimes to describe without imagery and without kind of live products in
Yeah.
front of us.
Well, thanks for sharing. Like Christina, like I think one thing that I really resonates is how do you prioritize these things? Like how do you prioritize explaining things to people that maybe people have the perception that they're too complex to be explained? And you work in very complex fields and you're probably used to explaining complex theories or complex technologies to people who haven't spent any time thinking about them. Like where do you make that trade-off? Like how do you think about really prioritizing creating that clarity, especially when it comes to security and privacy?
It's a good question. I think it's always a little bit different, and it's about understanding the audience, as Elliot mentioned earlier, not necessarily like understanding who are the people that I'm talking to. If I talk to an engineer in foundational infrastructure, I'll probably use different metaphors or words than talking to a user. You were saying something earlier, Elliot, around how do you make this easy for users, and a lot of what you said translates in principles that we apply as well in security. I'm a security gal, not a privacy expert by any means, but a lot of things resonate with me, which is make the product secure by default, and like so that even if the user doesn't sign the terms, they shouldn't have to make implicit agreements to something that compromises their data, right? Another one would be this mental model of opt-in, opt-out. Basically, the way I think about it is like a fail-safe default. So if a system fails, it should fail towards its most secure state, right? If you're on a boat and something goes bad, you don't want to have the cargo bay open, right? So I think we go towards the same on the same path with different ways of calling things, but I think understanding how would an engineer in front end versus an engineer in the back end or a customer would think of what we're doing. And one of my favorite metaphors that was picked up a lot by my colleagues was a cupcake factory, because I'm like, if the business is not a fancy tech cloud system, but like a cupcake factory, how would we think about security?
Yeah.
Or privacy, or if Dario,
Yeah.
a lot of the expert areas that you guys are considering.
Dana, one of the things that Christina mentioned is like opt-in versus opt-out. Like you've been around the block and you've seen how the relationship of companies with privacy has changed over the time. Like the zeitgeist is different today than it was 5 years ago, than 10 years ago. How has this reflected in how products are being built and designed? That's different approach towards privacy.
I'm going to talk a little more about the fundamental and how at least I saw product management change over time. It used to be originally like we were in a waterfall method where you design everything up front, like you spec'd everything, and then the developers went and created it. And now we're in a much more iterative development mode, and now all the way into vibe coding. So product development has changed over time. But back then, originally, privacy was kind of like a checkbox. Like you might have training on privacy, all the product managers, all the developers, maybe like a half hour, you'd seen some slides, and then in your specs, you had to say, this is how we're addressing privacy. And then at the very end, right before you're going to go release, you go in front of like a bunch of privacy people, and they give you blessing, or you'd have to go out and make some changes and then bring it out, which is very backwards. And then things like GDPR happened, and there was there's a big privacy movement, and it kind of shifted where, because you had to do things like label data and tell where it was going, and is it PII, and so you had to think about it up front. So you do like initial privacy reviews and do your labeling. You'd have to think about it a lot more. But then also go through those privacy hurdles, and there might be multiple steps, but so the shifting came to think about it more up front. But I think Elliott mentioned, like, you still had these monolithic, massive, like all the lawyers would pile the privacy information into like big documents. And it changed a little with some of the regulations. So like things like cookies, there's like standard templates and stuff you can see, but I don't know, like every site I go to that asks me to accept cookies seems like it's different. Some have reject all, some have like, you have to go through a list, and who's going to go through except us privacy, people with security, like unchecking things, and, you just want to get to your data. But it's gotten so, but now there's AI tools, at least for product management, that you can use, and during development that, so AI has helped a lot, where you could say like, hey, what's the privacy implications of this? Like AI gives you a lot of tools that you can get continual feedback as you go and get opinions from AI, not replacing like final sign off or having an expert, but at least as you go, you can get input into are you still taking privacy into account when you're working on these programs? That being said, the flip side is, with all this AI, privacy's gotten incredibly complex because AI is training on all your data in every product. You don't know where your data is coming or going, and you could click a button that says, yes, I want this, and then not realize that all your data is now spread across the internet. And one thing about data and your information is, like, once it's out, you're not getting it back, right? So privacy is extremely important. It's still extremely important. But like, one of the things as a user of a product, one of the things you can do is, like, you have these big privacy documents. I can then take that and feed it into AI and say, hey, what am I accepting for? But why should, as a user, I have to do that? Like, shouldn't the product take that into account when you're going to, when you have to decide what you want to do as a user? Shouldn't you make it easy to understand? Shouldn't, as steps as you progress, ask you about the privacy implication? There's a lot of things that you could do to help the end user, instead of having this one privacy check that you don't understand. So I think that the net is, the industry's evolved. It's become, privacy is taken much more serious as we go. But it's also, as an end user, it's become much more complex to understand what privacy you're accepting and what systems can get your data and everything. So it's still a little mess.
Yeah, I mean, like browsing the web, especially in Europe, where you have to, like, every website you visit, you end up having to agree to a cookie banner that is structured differently, and sometimes I feel like they're trying to trick me into falling for dark patterns. But like, if you want to do it the right way, how would you break down these complex concepts of that cookie banners have tried to address in a way that people are willing and able to digest them? Like, do you have some examples, Elliott, on what are the things that you can do to help people be aware of what they clicked and not just be a speed bump?
This is a great question, and to kind of pick up, I think the kind of the element about the the kind of the cookie design being different, obviously to reflect different data use policies and different regulations in different countries, different websites and design patterns, is is a good kind of example of that. One way that I think we do this is we provide consistency across the system. So we use consistent elements, consistent terminology, to ensure that people understand exactly what is being said. We make sure that there are no surprises in the UI. To kind of go a little bit deeper on that, one example that I worked on was for an accounts product at Meta, and again, this was for admins, and we know that company admins are, they're going through. I think you guys maybe talked about this alluded to this on your AI episode, that company admins are going into more complex decision processes than ever before because of AI, because of shadow AI, because of all this kind of technology. They need to know exactly how their data is being used. And one thing that I did, I think I talked about a little bit earlier, was pulling out and summarizing some of the concepts that perhaps a privacy notice is talking about, and not replacing the kind of the actual, detailed language, but kind of summarizing it and putting it into the UI. So one pattern that I was working on was, again, as I think you said, Dana, how do you reduce the cognitive load here? So saying to users in this UI, this is how your data is used, Facebook won't see anything. What does this mean for me? What can I see and access? Again, talking about GDPR, rollout of GDPR. What can I see, access, and delete? And then breaking it down into bullets of what is most important for me. So you can see and report and access any data that your employees are using here, because this is keeping you safe, is keeping your company safe. And on the flip side, saying that to employees, your company can see everything you share in your account and everything you create, just to create that awareness. And it's not replacing T's and C's or privacy notices, it's pulling out the headlines and putting them into a UI that is easier to understand, creating a messaging hierarchy, which is about me. What do I need to know when I'm using this product? Within tech, as I think you said, Christina, we all, we know how, we have our shorthands and our terminologies, and we know how to talk about this. But I'm always thinking, what does the user need to know most importantly? And I'll kind of wrap up here, but another kind of element of this is actually, I think people are becoming more and more literate about privacy as time goes on. As I've kind of seen technology emerge over my career, people know about data leaks now, and they've seen things in the press, and people kind of have that line of, oh, I think my phone's listening to me, or I'm worried about my profile of this and that. And I think that's, again, you're meeting people where they are, and you're kind of saying, look, we care, and this is exactly what you need to know. This is the kind of the summary. And again, putting that in UI, putting that in dialogues, perhaps even having like a specific part of the product that people can navigate to, where they can just learn and kind of have a bit of a checkup and say, okay, I understand this now. I feel confident, or I feel reassured, or I'm not confident and I'm not going to pick this product. So I think that's the other thing. It's not about dark patterns. It's about transparency and clarity. And how do we use the UI? How do we use the elements we have to kind of pull out the most important information and really kind of tell people what is relevant to them, so that they don't miss the important kind of headlines. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. So, like, Dana, like if you think about like building these things and explaining users how or customers or employees how the data is being used, is sometimes being seen as a distraction, and like you have other interests within your organization that maybe want to optimize for click-through rate or a sign-up rate. How do you approach, as a product leader, how do you approach these trade-offs with your stakeholders?
I think you need to set up like standards up front about what you're going to do. Christina mentioned like opt in or opt out, right? And like that's such an important decision. Me, security, always want opt in instead of opt out, right? Um, but Also, as I was going through, I was thinking about terminology and labeling and having that consistent. And then that means that like if everybody labeled their data or what you're trying to approve in terms of kind of in a common terminology, so that everybody who looks at it across these different sites or across these different properties understood what they were agreeing on, because it's the same, this is your personal data. These are your artifacts. That might not be the wrong granularity, but at least the language is consistent across the board. And I also think as management, and I've seen this at companies as the transition has happened. You need to make clear as leaders that privacy is like of the utmost importance, like your integrity, your how you're perceived, is also directly, it hits through your bottom line as a company. If you have a privacy breach or you did something wrong, it's going to affect your stock price. And so um you need to make it clear that this is important. This for leadership is one of the important things that you do, like security, privacy, compliance. Putting out product is very important. So I, I think making sure that, and this is actually a change I think that I've seen in the industry over the last 10, 15 years, is like it used to be you'd have one privacy guy, one security guy, one compliance person, and then everybody would go to talk to them about it. And now it's like everybody needs to be the general purpose as like a product manager and understand all these different things. And as you're going, make decisions about it. And so you're much more informed. And so, but the big thing is you should, from an organization standpoint, you should have guidelines and let everybody know how that you're serious about it, and lay out like consistency about what you expect for privacy.
A lot of that clarity that we're talking about often comes from how do we build things. So, and while more and more product managers and other people are starting to dip their toes into building things, most of the things are still built by engineers. So, Cristina, how do you help your engineers understand that the perceived hurdles of privacy checks and privacy guardrails, that they are good for the company and they're not just there to slow them down and prevent them from shipping cool stuff?
Yeah, good question. Actually, when Elliott and Dana, you guys were chatting, I took a few notes because I wanted to make a few comments, but I'll try to include them in the question because I think it makes sense. So one is product engineers, as well as Elliott, to your point, users, they actually know and care. Right? They're not experts like us in that field. They don't know about all the cookies and the JWTs and tokens and all the authorization frameworks and whatnot, but they actually know and care and want to make the right call. We just need to help them, right? And that's kind of the duty of the whole chain, right? Security, privacy, UX, and whatnot. So to your point there, Dario, I work with a lot of product engineers, and sometimes it's very easy for us, the security folks, to kind of wave off and say, okay, yeah, product team doesn't care about security. Well, it's not true. Every single person cares about security because they're also users, right? So I think there are two things that we try to help our product engineers with. And a lot of it is what Dana was saying, like just make it easy, right? This means standards, right? And not just like, here's a 50-page easy step to build this thing more securely, but also build some of this well-lit patch into the platform so that the developer can focus on the functionality they want to code in, not on choosing their own sandboxes or figuring out how to reinvent identity. So that's one thing. The other thing is, and this is not a glamorous thing for security engineers or for product engineers, is really having good threat modeling from the beginning of the product design. Like I would not go on a safari in a dangerous part of Southern Africa or anywhere in the world without considering, what vaccination I need to get or whatnot. So you would not embark on like building a product that uses user data and you don't think about what are my attack surfaces, right? It's just I find it very common sense, but it's very hard to implement well and not alienate your product engineers if we need to keep them for days to try to brainstorm what can go wrong. But having good defaults always, and this is a living effort, right? As soon as we identify new best practices, how might we put them back into either the platforms, the automation, the scanners, the security reviews. But yeah, that's one thing, and really kind of the whole effort, the way I think about it, is a threat modeling effort. And whether we do it in the beginning when we design and make sure that what we ship is actually consistent with what we're thinking when we design it.
Just to think about, as Christina was talking about, as product development has evolved, it's even more complicated now because you have all this AI generated code, right? And vibe coding and like who's checking the AI code to make sure that you're putting a lot of onus off of the individual onto the AI system to build these applications now, and like who's checking that it's making the right privacy calls, that the AI platform that you're using has the correct privacy safeguards in there and guidance on how to generate the right code for that. And you see it now with all these attacks where there's data leakage on prompts and all these companies scrambling and people bypassing their protections. And it's really it's an interesting evolution of how we work and develop product these days to figure out, if things are really going right. And you really need these guide rails and reviews and automation and things that Cristina mentioned. It might be even more important now as you go. So.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, like traditional 2D products, at least you knew where people click through. You knew if they click on button A, the next screen will be B, and then they will have that option. And like, so you have a linear path to guide them through. With AI or AI driven products and agents, you can't predict that. You can't necessarily predict that journey anymore. And we often talk about the attacker journey, where things can go wrong, maybe from an adversarial point of view, but like from a integrity and privacy point of view, where can things go wrong in an AI world where you don't know the interactions between you and the agents themselves. One of the things that have been mentioned a few times was the opt-in and opt-out, and I'm really curious to spend a bit of time talking about that, because it's such a powerful tool for building products. Like, what do you want the outcome to be? If you really want the outcome to be something, you probably don't want to ask people to do something, because most people just ignore what you ask them to. So you do an opt-out. But what are the mental models to decide if you want to do if you want to do something per default and expect the user or the employee to deactivate it versus the other way around? Maybe Dana, do you want to start sharing some thoughts?
Sure. So I think, opt-out is good for convenience, like making sure that, if you have to opt out, then by default, you can use tools that the company wants you to, and data is accessed and readily available. And you really have to opt out of that to prevent the data or the things from spreading. With the opt-in model, you can't do things unless you opt in, right? And so it's harder. People might make the wrong decision if they're presented information, and either opt in or opt out wrongly, because it's of the way it's gated to do the activity you want. And so, but I think opt-in is better from a privacy standpoint, because you have to explicitly say, yes, I want this action to happen. And so that's kind of the toss-up, is like, should by default, you have access, and then you have to explicitly say you can't have access, or vice versa. And I just yesterday I was using one of the top platform AI, and I had built this really cool AI app that I wanted to share with my wife. And so I said, I clicked the little share button, and this privacy statement came up, and it was pretty concise, but um, and in this case, they wanted me to opt in, but it didn't make sense the way it looked, the way I read it like four times because I didn't want to click the button. It was like, hey, like when you click this button, all the data through everything we know about you is going to be shared externally to everyone. And I'm like, that can't happen. This is really bad. What it was really saying is like, hey, to do the functionality you want, we need to access your other data within the platform. But the wording was so bad that like I didn't want to click it or make use of that functionality. And so I think it's all tied together, opt in, opt out versus what is shown to the user. If you want users to opt in, that dialogue has to be good. Um, and if it's opt out by default, you could do the other thing, which is really impact privacy by having people fooling people into clicking the to not click the opt in, the opt out. So it makes it seem like everything's great, and so it's really important to get those user experiences correct. So
Yeah, how do you challenge, Elliot, how do you challenge your product peers or like the rest of your team to really think about those fundamental decisions on opt out versus opt out, to think about that from a privacy and understanding and user or employee experience, and not just from a metrics view?
Yeah. Again, this kind of picks up on what Dana was just saying, which is one thing that I definitely do is, fortunately, I come from I spent a lot of time in Meta, where fortunately we have, and as you said, Christina, engineers and product partners who are incredibly passionate about privacy and integrity and safety, and so often it's very easy. People are really enthusiastic. Perhaps I'm lucky with that. And we also had, we had incredible privacy XFN and legal counsels and folks who are really specialist. Um, uh, Obviously, I think one of the big things is, like you say, Dario, is data. I've often worked on nascent products where the target's really growth focused or really you're in a big performance atmosphere and people really need to deliver, and that can be obviously quite hard to advocate. One thing I do a lot of is prototyping and qualitative research because that really gets you can kind of really dig into different ideas. I think opt-in, opt-out is an interesting model because that implies, there's kind of an idea of an upfront opting in and opting out. Whereas what Dana was talking about, actually, you can kind of use design to build these checkpoints. Um, I was working with using BandLab recently, which is a kind of a cloud music piece of software. And I was quite impressed when I downloaded one of the, or I kind of mixed down one of my tracks, and it said, oh, by the way, do you want to share this with everyone or kind of make this public, or is this just for you or whatever? And it was written in a really kind of nice, pithy way. And I think that's one aspect is kind of actually saying, well, do we want opt in or opt out as a kind of a whole thing, or do we want to add these checkpoints, which I often advocate for? Um, so actually, to kind of summarize that, producing different prototypes and kind of looking at things and kind of saying, well, what does work, what doesn't? Let's bring some kind of data there. And putting a before and after together, I think, it's hard to argue with an experience when you've, looked at a kind of a basic experience and then kind of said, well, look, we could add this, this, and this. And obviously working with engineers to kind of cost things out as well and say, well, this is, the risk reward here is probably not worth it. Being really focused on what we do want to, on how we do want to protect people, and kind of make people aware and make the business protected. So really focusing, kind of saying, well, what is the most impactful lever we can use here? And I think another thing is having really, strong partners and escalation paths. So again, you guys were talking about shadow AI a while ago. Um, One thing in a former team is when ChatGPT, really early came out. I kind of was like, well, hold on. We really need to make sure that no one is using this from a data standpoint, in terms of company data. And immediately went to my director, and she was completely on it already. But it was great to kind of say, oh wow, we have, I have someone I can go to flag risks. I have a lot more to say. I think maybe there's a question later about this, but really having those partners and building those relationships with your privacy XFN, with your engineers who specialize in security and the way that data is the back end is built. Those folks are the people to learn from, and they're also the people that will course correct you, and they're the people that will come in and kind of, make that case for you, or make that case with you, I should say. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. But yes, there's kind of two pieces here, which is kind of, well, is opt-in, opt-out always the right option? And where does it kind of live in the journey? And can we actually break it down and make it a bit more contextual, rather than, again, kind of throwing something up front? And also, there's that piece of, yeah, kind of how do we kind of sell this when we really believe that, that some of this kind of privacy enhancing design is going to make a difference? How do we kind of get buy-in, and when we don't have quantitative data, maybe? And yeah, I'm a big advocate for kind of prototyping and kind of, kind of putting options in front of people, and just getting their kind of raw reactions can really tell you a lot. And like I say, I'm a firm believer that people are, users are really aware a lot more than they were about how data is used. They've seen stories in the press, they've had experiences maybe themselves, and maybe this is going off topic a little bit, but a lot of those stories in the press about data leaks and data misuse, so many of them are design problems. And I think we also need to think of those as design problems and kind of say, as designers and content designers, we really are among the front lines with the front lines of kind of protection. The way that we show things, the way we write things, and the way they appear, they have to, often they can be the make or break point, between someone, yeah, dark patterns, people accidentally opting in to something they don't want to. So thinking of these as design issues as well, I think is a really important part of it.
As we were discussing all this, I was thinking, this probably already exists, but someone should make a browser plugin that like feeds whatever you're seeing on the screen to AI, and so it says, tell me what I'm agreeing to, or what is the impact, like it gives you a little um little summary and opinion on it. Definitely help the users.
There's your next product idea. I think that's
Right.
I would love that personally.
I mean, I've done it with things like leases, right? Like, or agreements that you're going to sign. I was like, fed it to AI and said, like, what is it about? Do you think this is correct? And AI is like generative AI is great for something like that. And so it seems like a good use of the current technologies that help users understand what they're agreeing to as they go through privacy, or what they're not agreeing to.
I'd like to
Really?
add something. Oh, can
No,
I add
go
something?
ahead, Cristina.
When you guys were talking, so the opt-in, opt-out, the way, let's say, I or us with the security engineering mindset see this conversation or this topic is the principle of least privilege, right? And when we're designing system, in a way, I almost picture myself or my team having this conversation with the product team and saying, okay, but like, what are you actually trying to achieve, and what's the minimum of data you need, right? And of course, you don't want to offer the user like bazillion types of options, but then that's where like us in the backend who are designing the systems and where the plumbing happens and whatnot, we need to work very closely with folks who are thinking about the privacy and the user experience, because it's like, if you design opt-in and out, we will be like, what's the privilege, principle of least privilege? What is the minimum amount of data that if the user chooses the wrong way, or what's the minimum amount of authorization or powers or whatever we are talking about, that if the user chooses the wrong way, what's the harm that can be done? And by the way, this is like threat modeling one-on-one. Like, what's the risk here if we do X, Y, Z? And I'll actually, I wanted to challenge Elliott, but he just kind of said something that I agree with, so I can't challenge him, but I want to say this anyway, is like this thing where like, if you make a system that is super easy to use, like everything is just flawless and everything goes through for the user, it's also oftentimes, in my experience, very easy to exploit. So it's like a well-designed trap, right? So I was like, should completely or absolute frictionless experience be actually a success goal, right? Sometimes as a user, I don't want to suffer, but like Dana, I want to understand what the friction is so that I realize what I'm agreeing to, and then I stop and think, right, and make a decision. And hopefully the principle of least privilege and all the other stuff is happening in the secure by design or privacy by design thing way. But like, I want to know when I'm crossing the border of something that I really need to be aware of.
Very
really like what
fascinating.
you said about.
And I think you're starting the episode. Or you go ahead, Dana.
I was just going to say, I really like what Cristina said about threat modeling and making people like just doing that, having the reviews, but in privacy, making people think that's the most important. That's what you miss out as you run into these things and try to make these decisions. And also I was thinking of what Elliott said about the like hurdles as you go, and that's like doing the same thing to the end user, is making them think as they go too. So it's just I think the bottom line is to make sure that everybody thinks about, like when you're developing or you're an end user looking at it, that everybody stops and thinks about it correctly and can make the right decision based on what they're shown or what they're not shown. Is most important. This discussion has been fascinating. Who knew that there's so much to talk about in terms of privacy and software development and product?
I just had one thing to add as well. Thanks for that, Cristina. I think, that kind of intentional friction is really important. And you just made me think as well, is that one thing is that often we need to kind of zoom out and look at longer term metrics and kind of long lead metrics. Sometimes, I've worked in growth teams where we're looking at 7-day, 14-day metrics, and actually adding that friction, especially as designers, there is that real pressure to kind of, how do we make things intuitive and frictionless? Because that's what we want on a product level when it comes to, setting something up or, performing an action. But it's very short. It's very kind of close-minded, and we do need to look at, that friction translates into engagement or retention in 6 months' time, for example. These are hard things to measure, easier in an AI world, but I think that's, the kind of, there is a counter metric there of, well, we may be sacrificing some growth in terms of a month, 28 days user or whatever. But in 6 months, we're seeing that, we're seeing that engagement continue because people are feeling safe and they do feel like they know how to use something. So I think that kind of intentional friction or kind of meaningful friction, however you want to say it, is something we should always have in the back of our minds.
That's how we got those mega privacy agreements that you sign, is like, I don't want the friction down the line, so you're going to agree to everything up front in this massive document and it'll cover us for everything. That's how people used to think about it, privacy. It's good that people are thinking incrementally now.
Yeah, because we believe that we can just build trust at sign-up point and transparency, and then we don't talk about it anymore. But maintaining trust in any relationship, me and the person or me and the digital product, is about talking about these topics ongoing. Yeah. So just not talking about privacy or security or integrity for like the life cycle of me using a consumer product is not building trust. It's probably also just making it more fragile to be disrupted by outside information, because I haven't heard from this product about what they do with my data in 3 years. So either they do nothing or everything, and those are both extremes that probably are not in favor of companies who build products. Elliott, I think we should have you again if you want to. I think there's a lot of, I hope so. I think there's a lot of other topics. I mean, patterns, transparency, clarity, also just respecting the people who use products, that they're not just there to click from A to Z, but they're there to really know what's happening with their data, what's happening with the information, and how we engage with them. Very interesting topics. Thank you for being here, Elliott. It was really great. Thanks, Dana and Cristina. for spending Friday early in the morning and Friday afternoon here with us. And to everybody who listened, find us on LinkedIn, on our group, find us on invertedpm.com, where you find the episodes on YouTube, you find them on Spotify. In the US, you find them on iHeart. Like, there's all of the platforms you want. Leave a like or a review or whatever your format is to tell us if you liked and how you liked this concept. And looking forward to the next conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
It's been a great conversation.
Yes.